So hello, I'm grateful that you could join us for this latest in our Alliance Live podcast series. I'm hosting our conversation today. My name is Sara Redmond. I'm the Chief Officer at the Alliance. So today we are saluting our sisters and matriarchs, and that's through stories of hope and resilience. I am joined by three, I'm going to use the word pioneering women. I hope that feels okay to you all. Ramatu Umar Bako, Satya Dunning and Twimukye Mushaka Macline. We're going to hear a little bit more about them through the course of the conversation. But I wanted to start out just by setting out why this feels like a really important conversation that we need to be having. Both why it's important, I think, for me personally, but also for the work of the Health and Social Care Alliance. Last year, in 2023, we worked on developing our strategy for the coming years. And that involved us engaging with our member organisations, our individual members, and also with the staff team. And what we heard from people was that they really wanted us to hold true to the path that we had set for ourselves, that how we worked was really important as much as, working, the actual work that we were trying to deliver. We heard that the vision that we'd set out was still relevant, that a Scotland where everyone has a strong voice and enjoys their right to live well with dignity and respect, that felt still true. And that our role was about creating those spaces and the networks and bringing people together so that we could work together to create that change. But we also heard that we could be doing more and we could be doing things differently and better in making sure that those networks were more reflective of the diversity of Scotland, and that the way in which we were working with people in decisions that affect their lives really recognise the barriers that people face, and that we were highlighting those but also working to remove them. So I guess that was why the work that we did together during Black History Month felt really important, because it started out from that principle that actually we want to platform people's stories, and we want to learn based on those stories, based on people's experiences and what matter, and actually create the change together. So this is I guess what's brought us to this podcast, and really grateful again that you all could join me in having this conversation. So firstly, I think it would just be really great for those who are listening or watching to understand a little bit more about you all. I would describe you as pioneering because you have worked on creating the change that you have felt is needed to make that positive change happen in your lives and in the networks surrounding you. So, Twimukye, can I come to you first? Tell us a little bit about you and your story.
Okay. Thank you, Sara, for having me in this conversation. My name is Twimukye Mushaka Macline, a Scottish with diverse characteristics. I came to Scotland in 2001 to been here for some time now. I would describe myself as an activist, a disability activist, a minoritized communities activist, a women's activist, because of the issues that I see that I'll talk about as we go forward. My first activism in Scotland started in 2004 as an asylum seeker. Then I found that we were always at the periphery of service delivery, and we needed to get our voices heard by service providers in terms of what the issues were and how that involvement needed to be done. So I've spoken about that activism for a long time, but, I worked with organizations like Scottish Refugee Council, some of the ethnic minority-led organizations at that point, to get the voices of refugee women heard in Scotland, particularly also making it more inclusive in terms of service delivery. I have also worked in the third sector for quite some time, and my passion is about championing lived experience of people with experience of different issues, whether it's health-related issues, whether it's poverty, whether it's, people who feel that they experience injustice in some shape or form. At the moment, I work with Shelter Scotland as the lived experience lead, again, giving me the opportunity to continue to make a contribution in getting the voices of people who are seldom heard to be heard by government, by people in power, by other service providers and the public as well. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Twimukye. It's so great to have you here. And Satya.
Thank you, Sarah, for the invitation. My name is Satya Dunning. So I am, I would say, a mixed race woman. I have an African father and an Asian European mother. And my journey has really been of self-management has been around trauma recovery and healing. And what I've learned from that is that as a woman, I lacked the language to be able to define and articulate my internal reality. And as I began to work with women, I call myself a facilitator. I began to understand that I wasn't the only one, that there was a need for a sort of emotional literacy about women being able to name their feelings, their needs, but also about speaking them. And what I've been discovering in my journey, and also in some of the women that I've been working with, is that there is an experience of shame that becomes attached to speaking needs and feelings. So I'm very interested in that experience and how it can limit a woman to thrive, to speak her needs. And alongside that, I've been working in the third sector as well, supporting men and women who experience that they have challenges accessing the resources that they need in order to live well, in order to be independent. So I've taken on various roles, and I also want to state that creativity and the body and movement are really important in my work. I trained as a contemporary dancer, and I bring the body and movement into the equation, into emotional literacy. I think the body gets left out a lot of the time, and acknowledging the body, acknowledging trauma in the body is key in terms of how we set up the conditions to access those resources in order to be independent, to self-manage, and to live well. Thank you.
Oh, lovely. Thanks so much, Satya. So much to come back to what you both have said already. And Ramatu, please, it'd be great if I could invite you to come in and just to share with those who are listening and watching a little bit about your story.
Okay. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Ramatu Umar Bako. I would say I'm a lot of things to different people, but I like to see myself as an education and diversity champion. An education champion because I come from a part of Nigeria, which is northern Nigeria, where education is still a challenge for a lot of young girls. So in certain circles, I'm seen as a role model for young Muslim women in terms of attaining or aspiring, to do bigger, better things with their lives. I also call myself a diversity champion because growing up, I had the opportunity of living in different countries. So I know what it's like to be a new kid on the block, the only Black person, the only person maybe from Africa. And, in some conversations, feeling like the token Black person, So I know generally what it's like to be excluded, to be set aside, to always constantly try to prove yourself, to show you're as good as, the next person. And I've always seen myself as someone that tries to strive, to show, to prove that I can do certain things, I can aspire to whatever level I want, and that being different is not an impediment, but actually, it makes conversations easier. And because of that, I tend to, join causes that gives people a voice, women or people that I feel are either underrepresented or, different, the opportunity to express themselves. So I would say that I'm the kind of person that believes the world is a global village. And it's important that we all are able to embrace diversity, to include people in, conversations that affect them. And I always tell people that I want to see a world where you are not judged by the color of your skin, by your accent, by where you're from, by whatever disability or what marks you out as different, but generally by the fact that you're a human being, you have hopes, you have dreams, you have aspirations, and you just want to be happy, and live a good life like any other person. So I would like to say that I'm basically the kind of person that likes to break boundaries, break barriers, and have conversations with people that have the same belief, because I believe that it's the way to go. And the younger generation or our children are looking up to us, to clear that path for them. So it's not about breaking the glass ceiling, it's shattering it and making sure there are no more barriers for women or girls. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. I mean, I think you can see why the word pioneering came to my mind when I was thinking about, the contribution that you each have made. What would be really helpful to kind of hear your further thoughts on is, when we're looking at health and we're looking at the health of, even just looking at the health of Scotland, but I think, globally, health is not in a good position. There's really big challenges facing people's health and well-being. And some of that is about the barriers that you were describing, Ramatu, and I think also, Satya, what you were talking about in terms of its impact, therefore, on our internal world. I think also, we're increasingly hearing about the impact that, racializing people, that racism has on people's health and well-being. And I guess I would just be really interested in your thoughts on that, because, how do you, what have been your kind of observations or considerations about, how our health is affected by what's going on in our society? Ramatu, can I come to you first on that?
Okay. Well, in terms of health, I think data has proven that, I think a couple of years ago, there was some data out about maternal mortality rates for Black women, and it was really high. And it just points to the challenges or barriers that, women, ethnic minority women face in accessing, healthcare. The fact of the matter is that a lot of ethnic minority women are not really taken seriously. People say they don't take women's complaints seriously anyway. Like when you complain of having pains and stuff, you're not taken seriously. So more so if you're an ethnic minority, for some reason, there's this general perception that ethnic minority women have a stronger pain threshold, and they can bear things. But what I've observed is that I don't know if that is true or a perception, but I do know that for an ethnic minority Black woman to present herself to a GP, for treatment, it's really serious. It's probably reached a point where she cannot bear it anymore, because most people don't like going to hospitals. We have the challenges, especially in our communities where race is an issue. Sometimes a lot of people complain that when they go to access healthcare, they are treated like an inconvenience. They are very treated in a dismissive manner. And sometimes certain processes or procedures are not explained to them in a manner they would understand. So they have this issue where they are not able to express themselves. They are not even sure how to express or describe certain symptoms, because they may have cultural names or there are cultural reasons why they're not able to, speak. And, for some of us, because of maybe religious, reasons, a Muslim woman, for example, would feel more comfortable being seen by a female GP. And, sometimes when that request is made, it's already creating a barrier between you and healthcare, because it's like you are trying to impose, on them. But then I think there's there's the need for conversations around cultural sensitivities, because some of these requests are not, women trying to be difficult, but for cultural reasons, upbringing, and the way they grew up. There's a need to have a female person who they'll be free to speak with, because some cultures don't encourage mixing between men and female. So a lot of women find it difficult to speak to men that are not their husbands, brothers, or fathers. So that in itself is something that needs to be seen. And also language barriers. When we talk about language, it's not just English or speaking and understanding English, but sometimes there are certain nuances that come, and terms that, come into play when those conversations take place with health personnel that they need to be aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. Satya or Twimukye, would either of you like to come in on that? Twimukye?
Okay. Ramatu has mentioned quite a number of issues, and I wouldn't want to water down anything. But one of the first things that perhaps I wanted to talk about was the language that describe women who are non-white. Mm-hmm. Things like BME, things like people of color. Now we have minoritized ethnic groups. That banding of people in one box is the big problem. I think we need to disentangle that and find the language that is inclusive, that does not reinforce the othering of the population. So that's the first thing. And Ramatu has really eloquently talked about the language barriers in accessing healthcare as a key area. So, for instance, if I was talking about how I would want to be described, I wouldn't want to be described as a person of color or a BAME, but maybe as a Scottish African woman living in Glasgow. That is the language, that debate about how we feel part and parcel of the Scottish society is equally important. I just wanted to talk about access to health services in general. For example, there is a lot that needs to be looked at when we look at women's experience of antenatal care and maternity services. There has already been evidence and research that says that women who are non-white, without finding the right word, tend to experience more challenges and racism within that sector. And again, we need to unpack that call it out when it happens and see what are the solutions that we can recommend on that. And then finally is also, I think, looking at the impact of digital exclusion on women of color, for want of a better word, because everything, especially during the pandemic and after the pandemic, everything is going digital. It assumes we have the skills and the competences to operate digitally. It assumes that everyone has access to internet connection and the gadgets that facilitate that. So even now, a simple as to access a GP appointment is a nightmare for so many people, live alone, women from Black and other non-white communities. So it also is about exclusion in setting the agenda for what a good healthcare system looks like in Scotland. We are often invited to respond to a consultation on an agenda that has already been set. But it would be more helpful if everyone, including women like myself and others, can be at the design stage of any healthcare services so that those voices are heard at that planning stage. So I'll stop there for now.
Thank you. Satya, please, I'm interested in your reflections on that as well.
Thank you. It's a very rich discussion, and when you mentioned the words racism and health and well-being, what came for me was that as a woman who's turning 51 this year and who is from a mixed multicultural background, I was born in Senegal. My dad is from Benin. My mother has European Asian roots. When I lived in Senegal, I was seen as Tubab. Now, Tubab in Wolof means a white person. So I am not white enough. I am not black enough. And I think it's really important for me to articulate that, because coming to London, to the UK when I was 16, suddenly I was seen as a black person. So I really want to bring that into the discussion and into what Ramatu and Twimukye are talking about in terms of banding people together. You know, I have experienced the othering from both sides, from the white side, from the black side, and I have received the label as being white and the label of being black. So I have this very interesting experience of identity, which is not something that I would necessarily choose for myself. I very much see myself as a multicultural sort of citizen of the United Nations, because I really have that richness in terms of culture, in terms of, you know, the foods that my mother cooked at home and my dad as well, Beninese food, Burmese food, Indian food, etc. So that's my first point, is where do I fit into that discourse? And over the years, I remember emailing one of the centers in Glasgow to ask, can you point me to data that informs me about the health of mixed race women, Black African women, you know, with those identities? And I can't find it. I can't find it. So that's the first thing. That's the first reflection. The other thing that comes to mind when Ramatu was talking about women not being taken seriously and showing up at the hospital, because if they do that, that's because they've reached a certain level of pain. It made me think about women and how women's health are very, very different from men's health. And how, for me, certainly I can speak for me as a woman, the way that I articulate my health is through felt senses. I'm not feeling right today. There's something that's, I don't quite know what it is. So I think the language for articulating women's health is very different and requires very different spaces and way of articulating what I feel, what maybe other women who are listening are feeling. So there's something about understanding that women's health is very much tied in. I've been reading about it, and I even did a natural health webinar. I'm also recently qualified as a Healing Diets nutritional consultant, and in one of my natural health webinar, the speaker, who is a nurse and a functional medicine practitioner, was talking about how women's health is tied in with their vitality. Mm-hmm. So if a woman is feeling tired, she's not going to want to be intimate with her partner. So sexuality and vitality are linked in. Mm-hmm. Men's health and sexuality are very different. So I'm really curious about that. Can we open up spaces where we talk about women's health, how women experience their body, how they experience vitality, and can we see it from different perspectives, the perspective of Twimukye, who's Scottish African, did you say? Mm-hmm. Or, yeah? The perspective of Ramatu, the perspective of me, as a mixed race woman, perspective of you, Sara, as a white Scottish, maybe, woman. This is my assumption. Can we have those spaces?
I'm really struck, actually, by what you've all said around we really don't perhaps have enough of those opportunities to do those things, to have those conversations, which allow us to have the chance to understand our own health mm-hmm. and well-being, to understand each other's perspectives. Mm-hmm. Because it struck me what you were saying is, language is helpful for making sense of the world, but it becomes harmful when someone places a language on you. Mm-hmm. And it becomes an othering, it becomes a way to reduce you rather than being an expressive way. Twimukye, come in, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to pick on what Satya has talked about on issues affecting menopausal women. And this is an issue for all women, mm-hmm. regardless of their race and identity. But African women in particular experience menopausal symptoms in a different way. I'm told that there is research and evidence that shows that we take longer in that cycle. Why? I don't know whether it's anything to do with the genes or whatever. But then also we are more likely not to come forward for support to go on HRT, for example. Is it HRT? Yeah, HRT, for example, because of misinformation about the causal links with cancer, about the perception. Our mothers never did use HRT, so we can. And we forget that the environment where we are now is different. The physical exercise that my mother had is not the same level of exercise that I do. Even though she would not know that she was doing exercise, she would go to dig, she would go fetch water, firewood. I don't. I spend the whole day in front of a computer, as we say. So we need to open those spaces to understand that and address the lack of information and misconceptions around that and make sure that there is adequate support available for women in that particular stage of our life. And I'm much ahead in terms of the menopausal experience. And luckily I've found the use of HRT very helpful to give me the energy and the mental focus to still be able to stay in work. But a lot of people find that it's too much and they leave the workforce, which is unfortunate. Yeah. So that is something that we need to diversify understanding and how that impacts on different women.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ramatu, I'm just wondering whether you had any reflections on that. I guess, that point about the spaces and the places where we can actually have those conversations about health, and allow people to find their own language and language with others around that.
Yeah. I think just like Twimukye and Satya have said, the issue of language and othering, it's very important or symbolic in the sense that, a lot of people from ethnic minority backgrounds, especially from African, women generally tend to be put on the spot, because trying to express yourself or explain what's going on, is usually a challenge. And because maybe issues like menopause are not really things people talk about or have not been given a name. It's now, in retrospect, we think of women of our mother's generation having menopausal symptoms, but there was just no name to call it, So there were all sorts of things. And, because we feel we're being put on the spot most of the time, a lot of things go ignored because you don't want to be labeled. You don't want to be made to feel like something is wrong with you. So that issue of shame, comes in to your conversations. So by opening up, should I say the conversations, for people to be able to express themselves and have, a light bulb moment and say, oh, is that what I've been feeling? So it's menopause. It's not like I'm going crazy. It's not like something is wrong with me, is really very important. And, I would like to bring it back even to the issue of the mental health and well-being of a lot of, ethnic minorities or Africans. Like in Scotland really encourages, conversations about diversity. They're trying or aspiring to be a diverse community. But then, by putting ethnic minorities, lumping them into one, homogeneous group is doing more harm than good. Because there are people that come into Scotland with different backgrounds. We have those seeking asylum, those that are refugees, those that are migrants, maybe workers, skilled workers, students, or people that are here for other reasons. And their circumstances are different. There are laws that protect each of them or unprotect each of them, So it's like their stories are different. Their circumstances are different. So the situations they find themselves, the conversations are different. So it's important to really understand that, when you create those spaces, like that's why I always talk about encouraging the difference, the diversity, to talk. It enriches conversations and gives people different perspectives, about certain issues. And the issue of mental health is such a wide concept and conversation because a lot of times we're not even given the opportunity to express yourself or even complain or acknowledge that, there is an issue in terms of, being able to speak about your mental health, talk about issues like depression, anxiety, and so many other things. It's still like a taboo topic, issues of mental health. There isn't much understanding within, a lot of ethnic minorities. We're just now understanding that some of the feelings that people have or, issues that they have can be traced to either anxiety, to depression, to different, conditions which are treatable, and trying to reduce the stigma attached to those issues, by creating safe spaces for women to really talk about issues that affect them, in their core, and linking it to their overall well-being. A lot of people hear about physical exercise, taking walks, doing the physical exercises, but then we also need to appreciate that mental health is also important and should be, hand in hand with conversations when you're talking about the well-being. And there's a guilt complex because there are a lot of women within ethnic communities that feel they are too busy taking care of the home, their children, and, they take a back seat to themselves. So in the process, we have situations where women have lost themselves, who they are, their inner core, because they've spent their whole lives taking care of families, and feeling like their thoughts or feelings are not as important as, other members of the family.
I think that's a really important reflection, and I really recognise that in the stories that we were sharing during Black History Month, and it got me thinking, that there was something consistent in what you were all saying around the importance of, people having a voice in decisions that affect their lives. But actually that is it's not always an easy to accept thing. It's not an easy thing to do for yourself. So I guess what I'm asking is what you have learned about the importance of representation and of doing that in a way that also encourages other people to get involved. Twimukye, can I come to you first?
Yeah. As you said that, I'm reminded by one of the quotes I used to use quite a lot in my speeches, was that a quote by the late Ed Roberts of the United States, who said that when others speak for you, you lose the greatest part of the argument. Which means that all of us should have a voice. Mm-hmm. That's number one. But also, not looking at the voice that is stronger, I would consider myself to have a strong voice because I put myself in that space. But there are different approaches to get people's voices heard, and we can facilitate those processes to happen. Whether it's at the community level, whether it's, those who are comfortable with the digital participation, whether it's... So the list is quite long. Why it's important is to have the intention to get those voices. And it's not just about getting the voices, but being clear where those voices will then lead you to. So when you've heard my voice, what are you going to do with it? I often get asked that question. And so we have to be mindful that the purpose of the voices has to be clear. Is it for raising awareness about an issue? Is it consult on how best to do something? Is it for influencing a policy on a particular issue? Those reasons need to be communicated to the people whose voice we want to hear.
I really heard what you were saying there about intentional and, no one can speak for another person. Mm-hmm. Satya, I'm really interested what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I think that for me, my perspective is that it's really important to engage with welcoming. Mm-hmm. What does welcoming mean? And the work that I do in my emotional and body and nutritional literacy programs is to encourage women to welcome themselves first as a basis to welcome others. Yeah. Welcoming myself home means using the tool of awareness to understand where am I not showing up for myself? Where am I lacking the tools to do that? So I think for me, I come back to that place of what let me do the inner work. And I think that's missing in the evolution of being human, regardless of your color. Mm-hmm. There is something about the human evolution that requires that level of literacy. We're very literate technologically as a race, mm-hmm. But what about emotions? What about even understanding the basic that feelings are transitory? You know, they don't last. For some people, that's a huge revelation, you know, when it comes to mental health. And I'm not minimizing, you know, very serious mental health issues that people have. You know, I've experienced depression, I've experienced anxiety, ideation, you know, I've wanted to end my life as well. So it's very serious. But can we take a step back and look at the kind of natural solutions that we can access? You know, I'm a great advocate of natural health and prevention and using the natural cycles of our planet, of ourselves, in order to manage, to self-manage, to take care of our health. So that's where I'm coming from.
We've had to say goodbye to Ramatu, but you know, just I guess before we finish up on our conversation today, one of the things that really was a theme to our coming together and to, you know, the stories we were sharing is the role that our networks have. And I guess I'm curious, you know, and maybe just to kind of, you know, finish our kind of conversation here, but you know, what do you feel have been the role, or what are the role of networks and the social networks that we have, and you know, how can these help us in you know, creating more of what we've been talking about? Twimukye, do you want to?
Yes, it's important to, I think, invest in identifying role models that help us to say that if A, B, C, D is done, it's possible to move from A to B. And I think in the case of our own sisters as African women, for example, the role modeling in Scotland has been patchy, you know. And I don't think, because largely if you go into the academia, you find maybe one or two. If you go into third sector, maybe you find some at the community level, but we need to galvanize that energy. And then also is to acknowledge that all that is work that require to be facilitated. It can't simply happen. There has to be the funding required to make that happen. And at the end of the day, it's also talking about the benefits, what is in it for me, not for the organization, you know what I mean? So that people feel that if I participate in this is why I get an opportunity to get out of the house. It doesn't have to be big things. It can be small, soft outcomes that people find useful.
Satya.
Yeah, Twimukye, we have to talk, you and I. So thank you.
Yeah.
Lots to take for me from what you've just said. When you talk about the role of networks, what comes to me is how, as human beings, I consider that we are creative and social creatures. And a network for me is essentially speaking to what, as human beings, we experience, which could be grief, expressing grief or mourning. So that's what I see a network being able to do, to include the grief, the mourning, to include the celebrations, because we have times when, you know, things have gone well and we want to share it with our network, to receive empathy for what I have experienced, and also to be able to ask for help. And this model is from the model of nonviolent communication and nonviolence. But it's, for me, a network is about this shared reality. Who is with me? Who can accompany me on that journey? And I love what you say about identifying role models. When I was in my 20s, I was obsessed with finding women who looked like me, you know, that light brown with that sort of African hair. And it's African, but not quite African because, you know, you don't have to kind of like comb it really hard to get through the hair. I was looking for role models, that women who look like me. I wanted to see them, and they're not very visible. I think there's something, of course it goes deeper than just a look, but there's something about that shared realities, like I am not the only one. There are other women like me here as well. And I think a network is about belonging and acceptance, and it's about compassion, because no breakthrough comes with judgment. And I think my perspective is about really creating spaces where we can humanize, we can be human beings again, and the system works for us rather than me fitting into the system. And yeah, there's probably another conversation waiting to happen in the future with you, Sara, but that's what I would say, yeah.
I think so. I think for those of you who are joining us, I think you can recognise why this is an important conversation to have and to keep having. And I just want to thank you for sharing so openly your experiences and your wisdom for what what we want to be cultivating to really improve the health and the well-being for people. I look forward to our next conversation. Twimukye, Satya, Ramatu, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sara. Thank you, Twimukye and Ramatu.
Yeah, thank you.